Okay. So, Matt, what are you listening to right now?
At the moment, I'm listening to you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, but like what? And I popped this on you. I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but I'm just curious.
I'm a huge podcast guy. I've been listening to podcasts since the days that we actually listened to them on iPods. I think I started with I was listening to Slate Political Gab Fest a lot then, and I was listening to Bill Simmons when he was before The Ringer, when he was with ESPN. So podcasts are a huge draw for me. The one that I listen to a lot now is the Pivot podcast with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. I have a podcast rule where I don't listen to podcasts that are two dudes talking to each other. For me, there has to be a woman's voice in the podcast at all times.
Sure.
The one that I really dug.
I think my favorite are women podcasts. Come to think of it.
Yeah. There's one that's really great called Keep It, which is, I thought was like a Black African American themed podcast originally, but my daughter mentioned, she was like, Dad, that's it's like a LGBT podcast. I was like, all the better. That one was it's really good. It's mostly pop culture, but then, it's funny, on the music side, I was looking at Facebook sends you those reminders, and I was reminded of, I did a post 8 years ago about which was the better perfect ending to a record, the Clash with London Calling or Exile on Main Street from the Stones. And I just listened to both of them this morning, and I'm like, I think it's the Clash. That's where I'm at with that one.
If out of those two records, I'd probably pick the Clash, but it's close. But listening, I bring up listening and podcasting. It's interesting to do that because I feel like in the last year I've listened more than I ever have before, whether it is a podcast or really focusing on that during a Zoom call when you have to be quiet. I'm kind of the guy who's always trying to say something. Or really, I've been collecting vinyl records a lot more too. So for me, I think the theme of that of 2020 was definitely a lot more listening instead of saying so much.
What's interesting though? So, and this is something that I'm learning. So I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. And as I've grown as a parent, and it's funny because I think this speaks to 2020. One thing that is it's the first step in all of that is listening, but listening alone's not enough, right? And I'm learning this as I'm campaigning and running for mayor is you have to listen, but you also have to hear people. You actually have to hear what they're saying, because you can listen but not actually have any of it transmit, and you're not hearing people. And I think so I'm hearing a lot of what people are looking for in Allentown. And the next piece, and I think this is what the country reckoned with a little bit in the wake of George Floyd's murder, is understanding what people are saying, right? So first you got to listen, and then you have to hear people, and then you have to go that next step and understand where they're coming from. You might not agree with what they're telling you, but you have to at least understand it. And that is, to me, we keep moving in that direction. I think to all of our benefit, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think you see a lot of people who it's tough for them to admit some of those things or have that conversation because it's scary, and it's like, oh, you're going to watch me encounter this new belief, and it's a frightening thing to do. But yeah, I've definitely seen more of that conversation clearly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty. I mean, this is how we get better, right? We get better when we listen to differing viewpoints. And we get better when we challenge our beliefs, right? So wherever you start from, when you kind of open yourself up to other people's opinions, it helps you investigate. It helps you interrogate what you already believe. And so, getting out there and kind of, as I've talked to voters, and it's like, here's what I think Allentown needs. And you spend some time talking to people, and they give you a more practical reality, right? They tell you what they're actually looking for. That part, I mean, that's a skill, and I think that we're all developing that skill a little better nationally as events kind of force us to.
Well, let's get to that, because I'm curious. I read up on your bio. I mean, I knew of you clearly, but read a little more on your website, which anybody can check in the show notes. you started in East Stroudsburg, kind of made your way through part of the United States, met your wife in South Carolina, came back to Allentown. I think you could say a lot of that travel, that experience opens you up to a lot of things that can help you. But why Allentown? Why end up here and then say, this is where I want to raise my family of 2 daughters, and you want to stick around? It's something to go into. Particularly this mayoral race is going to be pretty wild. What is it? Why do you want to do this so badly? What is it about Allentown?
So I ended up in Allentown so there's a very long version and there's a slightly shorter
Whatever
version.
You want, I'm in.
So,
I love these stories.
So I was born in East Stroudsburg, right? Mm-hmm. And the joke that I always tell is we moved to Colorado when I was 9, which was after 3rd grade. And in 3rd grade, this is like 1983, you learn in like Pennsylvania history class how to spell Monongahela. And once you have that skill, it's not transferable. It means nothing outside of Pennsylvania. So I always had to come back to Pennsylvania. As soon as I graduated from high school, I moved to Philly to try that out. Didn't pan out. Went back to Colorado. Ended up back at Rutgers Camden a year later, and just kind of stuck in Philadelphia for a while. Always with that like identification with Eastern Pennsylvania. When I actually went to Washington State to live with the person who's now my wife, and we ended up in South Carolina, but I always had that, like, how am I going to get back to Pennsylvania? And when I went to grad school, there was an opportunity coming out of grad school, which was, okay, I could go back I went to undergrad in Charleston, and I was working in Charleston in economic development with the Chamber of Commerce, and I gotten to know somebody who was connected to somebody who was going to redevelop a part of the Charleston Navy base. And there was like a 50% chance of a job there. Alternatively, there was an opportunity in Bangor in the Slate Belt to work for a billboard company that was owned by New York and Boston private equity, but the actual billboard company was in Panama. And I was like, well, this is an interesting choice. My grandparents were still in East Stroudsburg, so I was interested in that. I really loved Charleston, but my wife was 8 months pregnant, and we were like, okay, well, let's do the billboard thing, because that's 100% certain, and I know I'm going to be able to do that. So we ended up, I was a city guy. Like, I'd been in Philly, and we'd lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and we'd been in Bellingham, Washington, near Seattle, and I just wanted to be in a city. So when we were looking for a home to buy in 2004, we were like just full on blinders, like, just show me stuff in cities. And we had a realtor who was like, aren't you interested in this nice suburb over here? Your wife's pregnant. And we're like, nope, just give me the city. And so we looked at houses all over Allentown. Ultimately, we found this beautiful house in Old Allentown on 11th Street and moved in and absolutely loved living there. The best taco place in Allentown is on 12th and Turner. We'd go there like at least twice a week. There was an awesome.
You're allowed to shout it out, because I need to know.
It's La Placita, La Placita, Mexico, with George and Anna, which the best tacos in the city by far. Best tacos in Lehigh Valley, I'd say. And there were, at that point, Cal Thai, which is now 1001 Thai or 10 ton Thai or something like that in Easton. The original owner of that was a guy named Howie, who is on 12th and Linden at the time. Just had like this great eclectic like downtown, right? And we just totally fell in love with Allentown. We didn't think that we were going to be here forever. We thought like, okay, my wife's pregnant, she'll have the baby, we'll like move on to the next bigger city. But Allentown, we completely fell in love with this city. We ended up, another baby came along, and I couldn't do international travel anymore because it was just like too hard to have 2 kids and travel to Panama.
Yeah, I have 1, and I can barely travel down the street, so I'm
exactly
fine.
So at that point, we ended up. I met someone through it's like one of these like amazing kind of coincidental stories. Our older kid was at Grace Montessori, which is on 8th and Linden in the parking deck. And we met, like, my kid introduced me to another kid's parent who I started talking about urbanism with. And she's like, you have to meet this person who would totally get what you're saying. And that person ended up hiring me at the Allentown Economic Development Corporation in 2008 to work on turning Allentown around. So when I moved here in 2004, like Allentown it was, I didn't know, I loved my corner of Allentown. I loved what I saw there. We loved like our various different trips through the city and getting to know places like the farmers market. But we were like center city focused. When I was hired in 2008, Allentown it was Ed Plowski's first term. Allentown was struggling a lot with crime and with poverty and those types of things. And Ed seemed to have turned it around a little bit. And we were part of that early team. I worked at Allentown Economic Development Corporation. This was like the beginning of the global financial crisis. So it seemed like a crazy time to get into the business.
Did you have anything to do with the bridge works or that?
Yeah.
Because that space is...
It's awesome, right? I wish I could say that I had something to do with like the aesthetic vision there. That is, I would attribute that to Scott Unger and his like attention to detail.
But like those types of spots, like reutilizing things in a smart way that is keeping the history of it. I mean, I know there's a million different things, but that just to me is one of the things I knew of you of. Yeah. Like that's what I knew of you of. So it always stuck out to me. Yeah.
Well, that was that spot. So one of the things that we did when we got there is Scott and I focused that facility on making stuff. We believed in making stuff in cities. We thought that was a thing. Like cities had a history of being urban manufacturing centers. And I got involved through AEDC in a variety of different things that focused on making stuff in Allentown. We felt like a manufacturing job was a great job and we should make those available in Allentown. We also so one thing that I worked on at the Bridgeworks was the first co-working space in the Lehigh Valley, which is now kind of evolved and is a beautiful spot in the Bridgeworks. I worked on the development of a makerspace with a group called Make Lehigh Valley, which I think I saw something that they just got a huge grant from PPL to do STEAM education there. Like we had these kind of unusual out of the box ideas that we could try in a place like Allentown because it's like, it rewards innovation, right? We can try something and hey, you got to try it. Like, why not? And again, to preserve the history of that Mac plant. I love the story. That was Mac plant 4A, which Mac was like the first corporate headquarters to move from Brooklyn to the Lehigh Valley in Allentown. So I always told that Mac story, like, hey, there's a path for moving your operation from New York to Allentown. I tell that story in New York all the time. But it was awesome. I love my years there.
And do you have that international background? Without going too much into it, do you see that as a future for the area in terms of outside companies and people looking at this area to either come into? I know everybody says warehouses, but some of that tech, some of those companies who would want to come to a downtown space to have a tech space. Do you see that as something that could be happening too?
I mean, we're in a big transition period now with the way that people are using offices. So it's hard to say how those international companies are going to occupy office space. But when I look at the city and the region, there's already a strong international presence here, and there has been for a long time, going back to the steel. It continues to, like, B. Braun has a long history here in the Lehigh Valley manufacturing. You've got companies like Paul Ram, which is out toward the western edge of Lehigh County, that is an Israeli manufacturer. There's a company called Air Liquide, which I think is known as Voltaics, or was known as Voltaics, in Upper Mount Bethel, that is a French-owned company. Like, international companies have a great relationship with this region. When I actually moved from AEDC to the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation after 5 years at AEDC, when I was at LVDC, I started off doing data and research. And one of the things that I looked at was a number of international companies that we had here. And when I moved on to become the VP of Economic Development there, I had a big belief in our ability to attract international business. We had just landed a Chinese plastic cutlery manufacturer that was very interested. I went to China in 2017 to recruit investment. I visited a handful of companies while I was there. My boss, Don Cunningham, went to France a couple years before that, in Germany, and was able to attract a French baked goods manufacturer here. I thought there was huge opportunity for international, and then, not to get too political, but Trump happened.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, all of these conversations that I was having with international companies just dried up almost overnight. They were like, look, we just aren't doing it. And what I think what we can do, what we'll see now with a hopefully America return to strength on the international scene, or at least return to strength is the right way to put it, an open America, is that companies will continue will return their interest in investment now.
I think it was the LVEDC that did, like, it was a billboard campaign or something to the effect where it was a, hey, did you know that?
Yeah.
Was this your campaign? Did you know that XYZ was created here? I forget all of them, but they're like the Yankees pinstripes or something like that are created in Lehigh Valley. Because there is that, even though the Lehigh Valley is so international, you still have that strong sense of place of home, I guess is a way to put it.
Well, that campaign came out of me, like I was always like telling Don, like, hey, did you know that blah blah blah? Or like my first job there was data and research. So I was throwing him over things like, hey, do you realize how big the economy is in the Lehigh Valley? Like, it's bigger than the state of Vermont. And I was just like sending him white papers all the time. And
but it makes you think.
Yeah. Well, and he was like, why don't we do this as like, he was like, let's do it as a campaign. Like, let's tell, our first task at LVDC was getting the Lehigh Valley at some level to understand its significance. I think that one thing that we have here, and you can see that with like Majestic and the pinstripes on the Yankees, was that there's times where like we kind of think of ourselves as like not being as great as we are, right?
Oh, all the time.
All the time. We beat ourselves. And I don't know, I don't know exactly what it is. If it's
self-loathing.
Like, yeah. Well, and it's like it's an Eastern Pennsylvania kind of self-deprecation. Like,
you're supposed to. I was just talking. It's like you want to hate where you live for some reason. I don't know. It's that crab mentality. Do you know what I mean? Where if you see, like, if there's somebody doing good, you don't want them to really do good because then you're going to have to do good, and so it's just like, come down with us, come down to miserable land, and hang out here. But you're seeing more and more. We've been doing work with the DBA in Bethlehem, just more and more of that. We're just going to be positive, and if you're going to be negative, great, but we're going this other way, and we're not going to waste our energy on you.
Well, and it doesn't have to be like over. So I remember early in my days at Allentown Economic Development Corporation, we were working with a guy named Bob Wood, who he had something called, he would ask us to just boast about Allentown all the time. And he was like really fighting this campaign to like, let's get people to be proud of this place. And he got knocked a little bit for being like too much of a cheerleader for Allentown. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a cheerleader for a place that you love, right? Like, I would get out and just tell everybody about this amazing place. It's not for everyone, right? Like,
right.
What we love about this place, it's like when you describe, like, when you talk about how awesome the Allentown Farmers Market is, and it's like when you describe it, it's like, okay, I want you to imagine a place where like there are senior citizens who are haggling over the price of food that's about to go bad, and it's in a drafty, former agricultural hall. People would be like, why would I be interested in that? But
it's next to, there's a wine shop in there, and there's next to the candy shop.
Right.
Right.
When you
get
there, they're like, this is the most amazing place. They absolutely go bananas for it.
It's weird because if you think, like, say you were in the regular Lehigh Valley person's in Denver, and then you overhear somebody talk about Allentown, you would be so proud. That's not an opportunity then where you're like, I hate it.
Right.
You're gonna be like, no, it's great. We got the Iron Pigs. We got this and that. It's an interesting, I think, psychology. But on Facebook, you'll comment how much you hate living there. So I don't know. It's interesting in that way.
Well, it's not. I mean, so one of the things that I've done, and what I working at LVDC at the end, my past 5 years there, was telling people around the country about this amazing place, right? So I got to do it over and over and over again, and I started to explore like different media for doing that. Like my favorite thing to do was like when somebody made an announcement about like Snap made an announcement about establishing a headquarters in New York. And I was like, well, you could have done the same thing in Lehigh Valley for a fraction of the cost and had better access to this, that, and whatever, and just keep like peppering at companies.
Did the CEO of Snap from Allentown, I think.
Really?
I think so. Wait, I'm gonna check that because it's gonna bother me. CEO of Snap Allentown, PA, or at least at one point.
Huh?
Maybe not.
There's you get that. Like,
We'll move on. I'll find this later.
all right. There's
somebody high up was they're from Allentown.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to keep going. So you're here now. We talked about Center City, and I think that's one of the things when people do want to focus on anything negative. It's that maybe there is too much focus on Center City, but Allentown's a city and neighborhoods. The West End is one of the most interesting places in the Lehigh Valley to go. Probably the nicest. What do you say about that? Do you think we have to look at Allentown as a whole? Are there things that we're not looking at? I mean, this is a very open-ended, vague question, but I'm just trying to say that maybe we're focusing too much on Center City.
So that's one of the things that I've discovered. So when I kind of got this idea that I'd like to run for mayor of Allentown, it was while running. So I'm a marathon runner.
Okay.
I run a lot. Like I run and I run a lot from my house. So I live off Hamilton Street, 16th and Walnut, and from there, like I have to like track little routes that will keep me. Sometimes I have to put 20 miles in during training, and so I try to figure out like, okay, how can I get 20 miles in the city of Allentown? So I would do that. I've done that for years, and I can remember on a long run, I was running in I must have been running on the east side somewhere and thinking like, I love this place. Like east side is so great. And you just have time to yourself in your head. And I was thinking like the east side needs more love. Like we need to recognize all the cool things over here. And then it goes from there. But now I'm doing as part of this campaign, I was like, I need to see every part of the city. So there's 423 miles of streets in Allentown, and I'm running every single one of them. I'm going to run down every half.
So have you started? Are you in the process?
Yeah, I don't know how many miles in I am. I've got a map on my website where you can see like all of the streets that I'm covering. I'm keeping it updated. But when you do it, when you're out and running all these streets, is you see all of these like hidden gems that nobody gets to appreciate, right? And to me, for the longest time, Allentown has been so focused on Center City, and even in the West, like the West End's absolutely awesome. But when you get over to the South Side, like I was running past the Humane Society on Dixon and Trout Creek, it's just like it's so awesome. And there's even like the cool little restaurants that you'll find on the east, like on Union Boulevard. There's an awesome Burmese place called Pacific Palm Bistro. That's just like we have Burmese food in the Lehigh Valley. This is the only
the best pho is on there too, I think. Or
yes.
pho. I'm sorry, number one pho.
Whatever it's called. That's on Union. That's on Union too. There's the vegan butcher is there. There's a really good Dominican bakery called Luna Bakery on Union Boulevard. Like there's all of these awesome things about the whole city that don't get wrapped in enough and don't get promoted enough, and they're what make this place special, right? Like it's those unique things that make us great, and it's an appreciation for those unique things and a love for those unique things and a willingness to like get out and explore and see what's going on. There's tons to love about, and I think so. This applies in Allentown, but it also applies to the whole Lehigh Valley. Right, we tend to focus on parts of our region or part of our city, and there's a whole other thing going on. You just have to get out there and explore and break down the parochialism a little bit. Like I think that there's a point in time where people looked at like the East Side almost as a separate city, or like the South Side almost as a separate city, in the same way that people tended to look, I think, at other parts of the Lehigh Valley is like, oh, well, that's the Slate Belt or that's whatever. And I think we can unify around some ideas.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to this, but I find this fascinating. Geography I find fascinating because here you can be in Catasauqua or, to Allentown in 10 minutes. Yeah. But they can be so different. And then I look at, and I can't say for true, but you look in some Western areas like in Arizona or something, and I wonder if they have that sense of hometown. And I'm guessing no. So it's interesting that we're such a the Lehigh Valley kind of needs each other, but we're still so independent.
Yeah. We forget that like we're all, I think in part because we're like, I don't know what it is either. All I know is that we have like we end up beating ourselves up when there's a lot to unify us, right? And it's sometimes like it helps to get out, right? And I think so my grandfather was born he was born on the bar of the Minnesink Hotel in Minnesink.
What?
And that was in 1913. I think
when people were just born on bars.
Yeah, exactly. I think he went to New York a couple of times, but other than that, did not leave East Stroudsburg until 1989. So he was he was like in his 70s before he left East Stroudsburg, and then he came to Colorado to visit us out there. But when you don't leave your place, you don't get a chance to see how special it is. And that's one thing that I've seen. I came back, I left at Pennsylvania, I came back here, I left again, I came back, and I travel for work. And there's a little bit of that, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had this, or wouldn't it be cool if we had that? But then you come back to like what is great about your place. And this place is, I say this all the time, like I lived in Boulder, Colorado. I lived in Charleston, South Carolina. I lived in the Pacific Northwest between Vancouver and Washington. When I'm talking about how much I love this place, it's based on experience with some other amazing places, right? And I've chosen, like, I think this place has something amazing, something special about it that's on par with those other places. It's different without a doubt, but there's an amazing quality to this place that it's why like I've dedicated, my family is here. My kids are like Lehigh Valley kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they want to go out and see the world, but they love it here.
Well, I think that's part of it. Like even the most sought after places on earth, if you don't travel from them, if you live in Los Angeles your whole life, that's maybe a little bit more exciting than living in East Stroudsburg your whole life, but it's the same ethos of you need to see other places to appreciate it. And maybe you wind up in those other places, but for those who return, and you have a better appreciation. And I also think you have a better appreciation when you're stuck inside of it too. We've been planning out all these other places we want to go, after post-COVID, and you kind of think, you know what though, I really want to go to something that Steel Stacks though.
Yeah.
I want to get that ticket first before we go to Nashville or something. Like, maybe we've been underappreciating some of these things. Maybe, we've had that discussion.
Well, this is the thing that happens to people who live. So I lived in Philly, I lived in Charleston, and you live in these historic places that have amazing like sightseeing destinations, and you never go there until you have visitors, right?
Right.
So I lived in Philly for years and never went and saw the Liberty Bell until somebody from the West Coast came to visit me, and they're like, "We need to see the Liberty Bell." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And it was
yeah.
Well, that's one thing I encourage people in the Lehigh Valley in Allentown. Like, there are so many cool things, like the Mac History Museum. I mean, some of the stuff is closed because of COVID now, but like you might not think about going to the Mac History Museum because you don't have somebody visiting you who hasn't seen it before, or like the Martin Guitar Museum is like, that's one of the greatest places on earth. And
we've been doing a series with Lehigh Valley Passport to History. So I've been learning all these new places, and I'm hosting it and still learning all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm going, and when we're done,
it's like there's the list of things to do in Allentown and in the Lehigh Valley is so long. Like you will die before you run out of cool stuff to do. Even if you're varying it up, and then you get back to like we are, we were like dedicated to those tacos at La Placita like every week, right? When you find something you love, you have a hard time pulling yourself away from it. Now we've got Union and Finch a couple blocks away, and it's like, okay, well, how are we gonna like mix this up and then see the rest of the city?
That's like the fun thing about whenever there's like a lull and I need people to get mad at each other, we'll just bring up hot dogs, right? Because you're like, how could you possibly eat? It's like all of them are fantastic, guys.
Right.
The only reason we're having this conversation is so we can get riled up, but we live in an area that has hot dog stands where coffee spots should be, in a parking lot. Like, that's a beautiful thing. Like, who has that? It just, it brings a tear to my eye.
I live a couple blocks away from Yocco's, and it's like I'll never cease to amaze me. Like that place is packed.
Works Cafe is a national treasure. Henry's Salt of the Sea. My wife, if she could eat there, that's our anniversary spot. There's these amazing places, and they pour like the hardest drinks in the area too. They don't care. I don't think they even measure them. So we always come out of that because it's the best thing.
All those places are there. We just have like there's so many cool spots like that, and it's something you and I were talking about a little bit before we got started, but it's that like it's the warts and all thing, right? Like that's what makes this such a great place. Is it's like, hey, and it's where we've I think gone wrong in the past in our what we're trying to do in Allentown is Allentown has struggled like. From inside here in the city, I think that people in Allentown look at the success that Bethlehem has had, and they look at the success that Easton has had, and like being what they like in branding themselves in a certain way. And people in Allentown have circled around like how do we stake out like what Allentown is? And what I keep saying is like let's just like embrace what we are. Let's not try to move toward being something else. Like, let's focus on all these fantastic things that we have now, whatever they might be, right? And recognizing that, like, hey, one of the treasures of Allentown is chocolate milk and hot dogs, right? And like, let's wrap our arms around that. It's going to sound nuts. It's not going to be the thing that attracts like the what we think is like the desirable folks from the Denvers or the Miamis of the world, but it's like what we are. And like when we embrace what we are, this is like an old economic development thing. You can spend time and effort trying to attract new business in, or you can spend time and effort working on helping your existing businesses. And the reality is that when you make your place awesome for those existing businesses, the new businesses will just naturally want to be there, right?
Right.
So if we focus on celebrating and the cool, amazing neighborhoods that are here now and the amazing restaurants that are here now, that will attract other attention, right? Let's focus on the good stuff. Let's build on our assets.
And it's such a shame to a degree because I know the stuff that like the Hamilton Main Street or Hamilton Street District, right? With some of the outdoor festivals that were going on that clearly you can't run right now, the beer fests and the whatnot. Those were the Blues, Brews, and Barbecues. Yep. Those are hits. Those are on par with Bethlehem festivals. Totally. Those are things that people were having trouble getting parking going to. And, you just hope that when we come out of this, that is able to, people remember that. And they're like, oh, okay, we're going to go back to these again. Because that's where the arts, that's where the I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But that, like, where the art district is, like, that's really where I feel like it is going to be so vibrant and exciting.
It totally is. And so I know it will because there's awesome partners involved, right? And there are people who are working on those things that just like, they bleed Allentown, right? So elevating the people who just bleed this place and love this place, who maybe aren't from here originally, but just like live in like their ride or die Allentown. Like that is what gives me confidence that we'll continue to be successful. And it's finding those little niche things, right? The best, like when you go down Hamilton Street, there are like the little kind of unusual stories that you find. Like there's no chains on Hamilton Street. Like it's not like you're not gonna have a Gap or a Banana Republic or whatever. Like that's the beauty. It was funny, and I don't know how many people appreciate this. Like, yes, there are chains in Allentown, but when that Wendy's, there was an abandoned Wendy's on, I can't remember what block it was. I think it was on the 700 block of Hamilton Street where the arena is now.
I remember it. Yes, yeah. That was like early 2000s though, right?
Yeah, that was like the last hurrah of chains on Hamilton. Like we just don't have that here because we have all our good authentic stuff. You were saying something earlier about what people are searching for. People, like we see this all the time. Like people are searching for something real, and Allentown has like realness all over it. It's just a matter of like embracing our realness, and it's not always easy to do because it's like it's letting people in on your family.
It's vulnerable. And you're, by being a cheerleader to a degree, you're setting yourself up for
Sure.
people going, okay, sure it is. And I get that, but it's also exciting too to to be a part of where you're living and to embrace it. Like, I don't know, it feels better than just worrying about when you're going to go on vacation to Disney World next. And
you put it away. You said, you said something to the effect of like, or earlier when you were talking, it's like, hey, you might not love this thing, but that's fine. As opposed to in the past, people were like, if you don't like this, F you, right? Like, we don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's always like, it's never great to tell people that they're wrong, right? Like, you can tell people like, hey, here's what I believe. And if you don't believe me, I get it, totally, whatever. But I'm going to keep working toward the stuff that I love and like keep embracing the stuff you love and staying positive. And eventually the haters turn around.
Well, it's funny because they put out the Music Fest. I don't know when this is going to air, but they released a Music Fest poster and it's beautiful. And, you put it out there. The artist is fantastic. And you just know, I'm waiting on Facebook, waiting for a negative comment. And then within 10 minutes, you're like, yep. How could you possibly? It's just one of those things where it's like this. You had to look at this today, and the sun's shining, and you go, "Yep, I have something bad to say about this." All right, that's fine, but it strikes me as weird. So, look, I don't want to talk too much politics, but I think this is interesting. In your race, you've been using a lot of live. You've been going live just on the willy-nilly. You're not even telling people, which is good. Do you? I think it's going to be interesting with this election, the possible people in whether they're mayors or other politicians on the local level. Do you see more communication of this type where it's direct? I feel like the disconnect of some of that local political activism is because you have to go to that meeting. You have to physically be present at some of these things. I think this makes the barrier to entry to some of that a little easier.
It's interesting. So I think that there is still what I love. One of the things I love about Lehigh Valley and Allentown is that it's big enough to matter, right? And again, this goes back to something earlier. It's like
how many times were the president, the Northampton County was on the news cycle. I mean, that was crazy. But yeah.
We're the third largest city in Pennsylvania. It's the third largest metro in Pennsylvania. Like, this is a place of importance. But we're also, and because of that, there's like resources that can be brought to bear to issues. But what's interesting for somebody in a position like mine is like, we're also small enough to wrap your arms around. So you can actually like understand issues here. You can go out and talk to people, right? So you might not, like right now they're not having like whatever neighborhood watch group meeting, but you can find the people that you want to talk to on Facebook. You can still knock on their doors.
We have a little neighborhood group. We have a little neighborhood Facebook group that's just like, hey, well, and it was great when the snow was horrible because there were people like, hey, the plow's coming at my address down the street. And so, so that communication.
Well, and that's the thing. And you can connect with people. So it's ultimately like the communication is about how you connect with people, right? And Facebook is one of those mediums, right? There are lots of other channels that you have to use. You have to be modern. You have to take advantage of new technology. So you can use Facebook to reach out to people. There are, you can send, I've been in favor of the development of a text messaging platform in Allentown to let people know when stuff's happening, right? So letting people know that there's a big snowstorm on the way and we need to get you off of the emergency snow routes. Letting people know, hey, there's a Blues Brews and Barbecue is back on and it's downtown and it's going to disrupt traffic. Letting people know that, garbage is not going to be picked up at a certain or on a regular schedule because of a holiday. Those types of like, using those tools, using the traditional media that we have, but also to me, like a lot of it is face to face, like getting out and showing your face and being among people. I'm huge on like, again, it's in the COVID time, so it's a little different, but I loved like going and knocking on doors for canvassing for Biden. But I've been connecting with people and saying like, hey, let's do like, I'm going to take a walk in your neighborhood and we'll walk along. We can be 6 feet apart. And we'll be outside and you just show me like what you love about this place. Like show me the things that you love in your neighborhood and then tell me what you think we can do better. And I just did a walk on the south side with a resident near South 4th Street. And she showed me like all these cool nooks and crannies. And she's like, here's a problem that we have all the time because, we're not getting trapped. There's this apartment owner's particular problem, and like to get out there and walk with people and have some face-to-face time, like that's something that I'm absolutely committed to. Like just being, I think that I think we live in again, it's a small enough town. I had the experience. So we're here in Panama. Panama is a country of 3 million people, and the city of Panama is 1.5 million. So it's one of those, again, it's big enough to matter, but small enough that you can wrap your arms around it. I can remember, like, if you wanted to go meet the president of the country, like, you knew that he would shop at this certain mall on Sunday afternoons. And it's like, hey, let's, like I want to go meet Torrijos. And you could just go see him, right? And I think we can do that in a place like Allentown. Like, just count on, hey, the May, like, I'm giving away some policy points, but like I'm going to have open office hours in City Hall. So once a week, I will work for a couple hours from the lobby, right? So that anybody can come in and just check in. I think actually I cribbed that from Donchez in Bethlehem. I think he was doing something similar. Like doing regular mayor's walks where like I'm a runner, but I'm also a walker. Like just getting into neighborhoods. You get my cat's tail now.
That's perfect.
Getting into neighborhoods and talking to people about their experiences, I think you can connect with people on that level. And I think it's imperative that we use all the communications tools that we have. Podcasts, you guys are killing it. I've been a podcast listener forever. We started off with what I'm listening to. Like for the longest time, I was like, I wish there was somebody in the Lehigh Valley who was really like telling Lehigh Valley stories. And between you guys, and I don't want to give too much to.
Everybody. Any podcast we're happy with. Yes, name them.
The Ashley Russo podcast is awesome.
Absolutely, yes.
Real Estate MBA podcast, that's fantastic with Tejas. Like all these, it's the medium is allowing all these stories to start to get told. I think like we just have so many great stories here in the Lehigh Valley. Like we can tell those too, right? We can use podcasting in City Hall.
I think I mean, we're talking again. I'm not sure exactly what's going to be there, but like Alden Capital just bought the Morning Call, which is don't get into it. It's not good. I wonder if you're going to see another one kind of more newsy. Saucon Source is an independent news source. I know Josh Popachak, the owner in Hellertown. I think you're going to see more and more, hopefully, of things like this. And we're not, like, in terms of competition, it's like, sure, I want people to listen, but I think a network is more important than competition. Like, if we have 10 podcasts that are doing stuff weekly, I think that's great because then it's hard to listen to all of them. Yeah. That would be a blessing. So
there's so many talented people. Again, this is like, so the thing that I really fell in love with, to go back on like Allentown and like why we got sucked in, like I fell in love with the people here. And I can expand that to the Lehigh Valley, but just the people in Allentown are just so awesome. There are like so many fascinating stories here. There's so many, like, there are people that, and I just get knocked out. And the talent of the people here, so like particularly within media, like there's so many people who have these amazing skills that they brought, and they end up back here for one reason or another, or they never left. But when you start to move around and kind of like tap the talent that's here, like we've got this incredible group of people that, again, big enough to matter, but small enough to wrap your arms around. Like you can do great.
We had an intern, Allison, who is now a professional podcaster. I guess her first episode went out on our network. And it's better than mine. She's a 20-year-old college student here, really doubling down on the market's there. I'm just saying for entrepreneurship in the area, it's exciting. If I was 23 and looking into that, I would target the Lehigh Valley because it's less expensive than some of these areas. And you can still do a lot of damage, money-wise.
Yeah, without a doubt. I felt that for a while. And, we're in a different world now where you can do that type of thing. And I think that's one of the things that the pandemic showed us, that you have to listen. But the pandemic also showed us, and this is my own personal like story, is pandemic showed us that it's like time to take risks. Like like I left LVEDC. I loved my job there. I loved what I was doing. I felt. Well,
you said right because you did it because it was the right thing to quit if you were going to run, right?
Yeah.
Is that
right? It was. I could not run for mayor and have the position that I had. So, but it was time, right? Like it was a huge leap. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to leave my job. Like I'm not independently wealthy, like I needed a paycheck.
Sure.
But I said, like, I'm willing to take a bet on Allentown. I think that this place, like, I love what we're doing here. I think that I can become mayor in Allentown. I'm willing to put aside, a paycheck for it because this is a full-time job. Without.
Oh yeah.
But it's, this is the time to take a leap. And I've seen so many people around the Lehigh Valley who are like, I'm going to take the risk, right? Like, what I'm doing is good, but I've always had this dream, right? And pursuing that dream, like now's the time to do it without it.
And it's interesting because the opportunity's there. And I'm not saying it wasn't there when I graduated, but media itself is so different. To produce something like this that we're doing now would have taken forever, or the equipment would have been just unreasonable. And now it's just like fire it up and go. And, the fact that you don't need to go to Philly or New York City to do that. And then there's places like, we're sponsored by Venture X in South Bethlehem. That's the spot where you can go and get your stuff done, and you don't have to have the overhead of some crazy office space.
Yeah, so Venture X is an extension of what I was doing with co-working spaces here in Allentown in 2012, 2013. Like we knew the idea was a sound concept at the time. We didn't think it'd explode like it has, but now more than ever, like flexible office space, like this is how companies are going to occupy space. It's going to make downtowns different for sure.
Well, it changes the game a little bit. Like that's a substantial, that office space, depending on the size of the business you are, especially now if you're leaner and meaner, or if it's more gig based where you have, like for us, we don't have as many as employees as we have vendors, and you can do that from a place like Venture X, which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, it allows, people still want to come together, right? Like this is why.
Oh yeah. I'm like,
we want to see each other. We want to go to a concert at Steel Stacks, or we want to be in an office space with each other
go to a hockey game. Like, come on.
We want to go to see hockey.
Please.
We want to come together. We have to find new ways to do that safely in a new environment. And I think that we have to reconsider the way that we do office space. But I think there's a path forward. And I think that a place like Allentown, again, this is the case that I made to Brooke, since the beginning of this pandemic. I didn't want to dance on the grave of New York much when I was doing it. But I was trying to make the case that, like, hey, all of the stuff that freaks you out about getting on a train and going into Manhattan every day, like, you don't have to have any of that here. But you can also, at the same time, have, like, cool restaurants. You can have an urban space, right? It feels like a city without some of the awful stuff about a city.
But, and in addition to that, you also can, if you want, commute from here to the larger cities, which is even, so it's like on top of that, you do have that as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Listen, this is fun, and I'm glad that it's always interesting because we're, clearly talking, you're running for the mayor of Allentown, wish the best of luck. And
Thanks.
We invite anybody else who would like to come on, please send us a message. I want to talk to everybody, and it's exciting. I can't imagine going through that process. It's so crazy to throw yourself out there, especially now in the age of social media, so
I'd say you probably do know what the process feels like a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, it's like running a startup, right? Like, and you have a startup, and I didn't know about this stuff before I got into it. I knew people who'd been through it. So, you start a business and you have.
Well, that's what I did. I took out like 5 people to lunch and said, "How did you do this? Because I need to know quickly."
Yes, exactly. But so it's like you're kind of like you're doing what feels right. You're building on you build a great team to execute on something, and you believe in the product, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've done that, right? So it's a little different because it's in the public eye a little more.
Yeah.
But it's I've never had a second thought about it's been a tremendous experience. I think we really are, the work that I've done here in the Lehigh Valley, bring jobs and investment. I think I can do that in Allentown. I think we can do better. We have, I would say there's no more passionate believer in this city than me. I'm not from here, but man, do I love this place. I'm not like Tom Cruise jumping on the couch level yet, but I'm close.
Hey, and I'm the same way. I'm from I'm from Honesdale, the Lake Wallenpaupack area. I came down here after high school and stayed, and I think that's the beauty of it too. There is something to be said for being born and raised here, and that's a special thing that people, you can't take that away from them. But I think it's also neat that people can come from the outside and say, hey, I love where you're from too, and I'd like to help it out. So
yeah, absolutely.
This is interesting. So now is your chance how do people get in touch with you or learn more? And we'll have this in the notes, but if they're listening now, I want to pop it in.
Sure. So mattformayor.org is the website. Matt, FOR is spelled out, formayor.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter, all Matt for Mayor 21. You can always email me. Again, it's open and accessible. So email me at matt@mattformayor.org. I love talking to people. I do the lives on Facebook. We've got a YouTube channel where I'm posting regular videos about my background. And you can always find me running in the street, right?
Stop.
On Sundays, I run anywhere from 10 to 14 miles. I'm out there for 2 hours at a time. I'm on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm running. Like if you look up, you're gonna.
Did you go out in the snow? Were you running in the blizzard? Yes. No problem. Yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I went to Moravian I ran track there. And the winter runs were always the worst. I don't miss them at all. So I'll wait till the spring to hit out again.
I'm like an all weather
yes.
I love the rain and the snow and the heat, but I just love being out there, right? So it's the energy. I have a ridiculous amount of energy, and I can't. This is me with no caffeine. I can't have my morning coffee and take it to City Hall and really push Allentown to get together with everybody in the city toward being a better place.
Awesome. Well, stay on the line, and hey, we wish you all the best. Thank you for coming on. This is a great time to talk and learn more. And like I said with you, it's the same. It's just about learning and hearing more stories. So, we encourage people to reach out to you and reach out to us. So.
Thank you. It's
Matt.
Awesome, and thank you guys for again, telling the stories of the people in the Lehigh Valley. This has been direly needed for a long time, and I can't wait to hear more.
All right. Thank you.